here. Yeah, I know. Well, several of us will. Are you getting sick? Gee.
Yeah. My son greeted me at midnight with Dad. I don't feel.
Our meeting is back in order. The executive session has ended, and the record will show that no action was taken. We were in the midst of a discussion on the agenda item 5D, resolution on star bonds. Is there other comments or questions from the council members? Mrs. Hiller?
Well, I've got to kind of reorient my head, sorry. I did want to do a brief report. We had a public meeting last night about Heartland Park. There were about 80 people there, and there was a lot of really good exchange. And I will keep it short, but I wanted to share that. We met from 6 to well after 7:30. Just on the side, using a small business venue was great. It worked out well for us. There were a few people that we see at council meetings, but for the most part, they were people who who had interests in the Heartland Park issue and were not regulars here at City Hall. There were even meeting generated some racing people who were interested in pursuing more information about the track. So I was pleased about that. The takeaways overall was people really did want to talk about the issues. They wanted to talk about the risk of losing $10 million. The options and issues regarding racing, and the issues of waiting to resolve the issue, for instance, letting a foreclosure occur, versus being affirmative and moving forward through the city's plan or another. They also wanted to talk about that net revenue loss to the entire community if racing were gone. So there was all kinds of discussion back and forth from people who just had questions, who wanted to see the city move forward with this plan, and the people who wanted to stop it. The concerns expressed included that we've sunk a lot of money into the racetrack over the years. We had a handout that had a timeline on it that showed what the money was, and it's been $12.8 million since 1988 when it was first founded, plus the star bonds that are issued today. And they were concerned about being reassured that we weren't going to spend more money beyond this issuance of these additional star bonds, and I'd like to chat about that a little bit tonight because they wanted to be assured about that. People would like to be sure that we've got committed, financially strong, and capable bidders on the track. There were those who had racing background and those that didn't. There was even a straw poll. People were okay with racing going on, but they wanted to make sure it was a solid operation. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about that with all the other things that have happened. There were people there that were willing to give their input. They've been to the track. They know what things they thought worked and what things they thought were problematic in terms of attendance and success at the track. Some of those items were offered, but others, they made it clear that they were willing and eager, in fact, to have a track, if it can continue, be successful. After some sort of spirited back and forth and some examples and good representation from the folks who ran the petition, who were represented there, most people, there actually was a straw poll that one of the people who attended asked to see, and the general consensus from people who were there was that about 60% of the people raised their hands and felt that we should continue with the city's proposal that we've been working on, and about 40% did not. One of the key things that we asked for, that we put out to them more than once in the course of that evening, was, does anybody have a better idea? something that met the tests of saving the taxpayers $10 million, saving racing and the other potential economic development at the track, and protecting that citywide 200,000 plus a year that we get in sales tax. And there was no one had a better idea than we have been working on. I don't know if my colleagues that helped with that want to add to that, but I did want to share just a short report.
Councilwoman Schwartz?
Thank you. I have some very savvy constituents that came to the meeting and asked some very good questions, and Karen and I have received even more information today. It's the best of the worst scenarios that we have to go forward with, and I think that the public has not had the opportunity to voice their opinion. And with that said, I'm not going to be able to support the motion tonight.
Councilman Brown?
I'll be brief also, but one thing I want to start with is I want to thank all of the people, all 80 who attended, and I was so proud of the spirited discussion that we had from both sides on the issue, and it remained civil the entire time. I will say that at the end of the meeting, and Karen and I stayed quite a while longer afterwards, there were actually, from learning more through the discussion, there were 3 people that came up to me who hadn't understood and hadn't supported, and after the meeting understood why we're trying to do what we're doing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Very good, thank you. Thank you for the report from the hearing that you had. Are there other comments?
If I could
council
ask
members?
a couple questions from that.
All right.
Can, city manager or whomever you would suggest, can you talk a little bit about the issue of further investment on the part of the city? Assuming we would continue and do the star bonds. People were worried that we keep spending money.
Mayor, thank you, Councilmember Hiller. It is not our expectation that we will be investing additional funds. The RFP is very clear that whoever is to either purchase or more likely enter into a long-term lease of the facility would be responsible for all of the financial operations associated with that. I want to be very clear here, though. The bids haven't come in. We haven't reviewed them yet. The RFP date has not closed yet. Ultimately, this body will see what the proposals are, and no determinations will be made until this body approves it, obviously. And so, but it is our expectation that there's no additional funds that the city would be responsible for.
Thank you. If I
You
can
got
follow
another
up.
question?
With that in mind, will we be able to get a preview prior to the 16th, assuming we would move forward today, on what those bidders' proposals look like?
I don't remember what the close date is.
It's the 12th.
And I think you said the 16th because that's a council
Yeah.
meeting.
That is
Did
a
you s-
council meeting date,
So I
correct?
think that's, what,
Mayor,
You know, if you
Council-
already know
I don't-
something by next week, that would be great too, but
Yeah.
that's prior to the closing date, so.
we will endeavor to provide as much information as we can prior to that date.
I think that would give me a lot more comfort, as well as the public who want to know what might come forward. And then one of the people who was there last night that got back with, I think, all of us today, had read through the NHRA pre-commitment that is posted on the city's website, and that is apparently fairly standard for NHRA, but makes a pretty sizable commitment on the part of the host, which in the case of the draft is the city, in terms of the fact that there has to be at least, I'm not going to quote it quite right, but about $2 million, 1.8 something million dollars worth of revenue in order for basically that host not to owe NHRA a lot of money, even if the race doesn't come off. And so the constituent was pointing out that that person felt that was pretty risky for us to have signed as the city. Is there an expectation that that preliminary commitment would be assigned to the new partner and would no longer be on the city itself in terms of that risk?
Mayor, Councilmember Hill, that absolutely will be the responsibility of the operative facility, not the city.
Good answer. Thank you. And last but not least, if we vote, this issue of voting, this sort of pre-commitment that's on the agenda tonight is a little new for us, at least in terms of this timing. If for some reason people became uncomfortable with this situation, is it possible to vote? Is the vote that's scheduled now for the 16th really a final vote where if we decided we didn't want to do this deal, we could vote no? Or is that too late, given this action tonight?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Hiller, I think I would answer that by saying if you have concerns about moving forward, tonight would be the night to voice those concerns with your vote. By the time it gets to you on the 16th, the bonds will have been priced, the bonds will have been sold, and again, as is typical, we're bringing those prices back to you with the results.
They haven't been closed, but they've been
The
sold.
process will not have been closed, but when we go out into the market and price and sell bonds, we're putting the reputation of the city behind that process. And if we were to backtrack on that process, it could be challenging in the future for us to move forward with a good bond issue.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Mr. Mayor, if I
Mr.
could,
City Manager.
I just want to clarify, the comment that you made, Councilmember Hiller, is that this isn't a different process. This is the exact process we follow every time. There's nothing different about what we're doing, except for there's a very high level of focus on it and other things that are along with it, but this is the process we follow.
Thank you. And you did discuss it earlier, where usually we've approved the project and the authority to bond long before, is what you were saying. We just hadn't done that with this one.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one person who has signed to speak tonight, Nick Scott.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of, what I thought was a silent majority, but after Councilman Hiller's remarks, perhaps it's a little more vocal than I thought. Anyway, there's a majority of people here in Topeka that support this resolution concerning Star Bonds and Heartland Park. Looking at the information publicly available on the Topeka website, which is excellent, and through the media, it's apparent that this resolution is in the best interest of the city and the citizens of Topeka. Heartland Park is an asset to Topeka, brings many guests from across the country, and these are people that spend their money here on hotels, restaurants, shops, and other things. The alternative to this resolution would be the loss of Heartland Park as well as the Kansas Nationals NHRA event. This is a crowd-drawing event that once lost would be nearly impossible to regain. I can assure you that there are many cities and many racetracks across the country, St. Louis, Indianapolis, that have national-level drag strip facilities. They'd be more than happy to host an event on Memorial Day weekend. Cannot stress that enough. In closing, my property taxes in Topeka are already high. As a citizen, I feel like they're high enough. Please act in the best interest of the citizens of Topeka. Please vote in favor of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there other comments from the council? What is your pleasure, Mr. Schmidt?
I would move to approve.
Mr. Schmidt moves to approve the resolution. Ms. Del Isla seconds. Further discussion? Not all those in favor vote yes. The opposed vote no. I vote yes. Seven having voted yes, the resolution is passed. The next item is the applications, and I believe there are no applications this evening, so that completes the action items for this evening. We go to the non-action items, and the first item is a discussion on the Downtown Historic District. Mr. City Manager. I was just pausing a minute because people are moving. Okay, we're ready to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to ask Mr. Finder, the planning director, to step forward and provide an overview of the downtown historic district. I think there's often a lot of questions about what are the implications on future development and improvements that one would make to a facility. Also, what are the financial benefits associated with this type of project? Mr. Finder will walk through this presentation and answer any questions.
Mr. Fiander.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. As stated, really we want to take a few minutes here to talk about and make you aware of a process that's currently underway to nominate 2 areas of downtown as National Historic Districts. And also just talk a little bit about the role that the city would play in that or has played in that. And answer any of your questions, because as City Manager said, there can be a myriad of unknowns when dealing with this. First thing, just a little bit of background. About 3 years ago, there was a survey of buildings downtown, commissioned through a grant from the state. The city undertook. It identified 3 areas in downtown for potential historic district eligibility, which is a pretty amazing thing in of itself. 2 of the areas were south of the river, 1 was in Noto. In working with DTI and with their help, there was strong support shown by property owners in the 2 areas south of the river downtown. So with that in mind, city planning, we pursued a couple grants this year to further that nomination process. Hired Rosen Preservation, which is the same consultant that did the survey. And so currently that is going on. And that I will just remind you, this is also part of the preservation plan that was adopted earlier this year and that would help implement. So that's the background. The districts, potential districts themselves, there is one on Kansas, it's called the Kansas Avenue Industrial District. It would be, it's west side of Kansas Avenue at First and Kansas. 6 properties. These are all turn of the century, basically industrial warehouses, and they all are contributing features to the district. So that's the first one. Second one is more the core of the downtown that we talk about. From 6th to 10th, Kansas Avenue. On either side, you have about 8 blocks that flank Kansas Avenue from Jackson to Quincy. And then the boundary, proposed boundary also jumps over Quincy a little bit to include Municipal Auditorium, City Hall, TPAC, and a bank building on the 8th and Quincy corner. So that's the boundaries. There's already 7 properties within that district that are listed individually. And it's the, as identified by the consultants, the densest concentration of commercial and government resources downtown. Most of the properties are contributing, what we call contributing features to the district. And the time period of significance is quite amazing itself, 1880 to 1965. There's a wide variety of styles, of architecture, of the evolution of our central business district. And that's the key here, and that is why this is being proposed to be nominated, because it is the core, the original core for the city. Okay, so a couple points about National Historic Districts. Many questions get asked. What we can't do, what does this mean to our property? Simply put, it is a list of properties. If nominated, if approved, it would be put on a register. All these properties would be listed. It doesn't force anybody to do anything. Repairs, it's not a property maintenance tool at all. So it simply gets properties on a list, and with that comes some other implications that we'll get into. One is, this is similar to a design overlay in zoning speak. There will be design standards overlaid within the district, so improvements must meet those standards moving forward. The idea is to protect property values, and then also drive investment, private investment into the district, of which we will get into as well as how that happens. There are 32 other cities in Kansas that have downtown national historic districts. Most of those were created after 2001, when the state established the tax credit program. We never had that before. Since then, there has been literally a multiplication of the number of cities that have taken this for their downtowns. And just by way of information, Topeka has 4 national historic districts, but those are located in our residential neighborhoods. So we do have some experience with those. Okay, let's talk about some of the benefits first. Obviously, there's some cultural asset preservation, there's pride, but one of the big economic benefits comes with historic tax credits. Historic tax credits are issued by the state and by the federal government. How it works. We'll just use the state level, for example. It's a 25% tax credit, which means if an individual puts $100,000 into their property to improve it, the state would, and those improvements qualify, the state would write a check back to them for $25,000 to be applied to their tax liability. And if they apply for federal credits, there would be, on top of that, another 20%, $20,000 on the federal side of the ledger. So it's a significant incentive, and we see that in several. Actually, there's a couple examples downtown. One that we just threw up there is the Carlin Building at 9th and Kansas. Used both of those tax credits to put significant investment into redoing and rehabbing that particular building for offices. So this is being used currently. Now, some of the questions that come about is there are some nonprofits and government properties. City of Topeka has 3 properties within the proposed boundaries. How would nonprofits benefit from tax credits since we don't pay taxes? Well, through the state program, you can actually sell those tax credits. There are several examples around the state. There's one actually in Topeka where a 501 uses it for Topeka High to do annual maintenance. And that is fairly significant as well. How that works, that $25,000 that I used in the example that comes back to the property owner, that would come back to the municipality or the nonprofit, and then they take that and turn around and sell it on the open market. The most recent sale was about 90 cents on the dollar, 91 cents on the dollar. So bottom line is you have a $100,000 improvement that you put into your building. You're probably then putting another 22 or 23,000 back into your general fund or your whatever, if you're a nonprofit, back into your coffers. So that's a big advantage. The biggest example that we found that uses that, Kansas City, Kansas, has about 15 historic buildings. They have nearly $1.5 million in tax credits coming back to them, just for normal maintenance. So let me talk about, I think I missed something there. I did. What qualifies? Here's the example that's been given to me, and I'll give it to you. The analogy is if you have a building, take the roof off, turn it upside down, shake it, whatever comes out doesn't qualify. So it's the things that are fixed to the building. It could be also mechanical systems, electrical, plumbing, roofing, windows. It could be this carpet that's here. So anything that's nailed down, basically, would qualify. So it's substantial. These are things that you would be doing anyway. Anybody might be doing and could qualify for the credits. Okay. With the district also comes design review. There's a design review process, as we currently have in our 4 districts already in our neighborhoods that we have. What is reviewed? Projects, improvements that are made that need building permits, and any public improvements would need review by Planning staff, for minor approvals, we issue those administrative approvals. If it's a little more major, it goes through the Landmarks Commission for their review and approval. If there's any appeal for or against that, it would actually come back to this body for the actual appeal. Just much like you see demolitions sometimes come back here that are in historic districts. Two caveats I wanted to point out. One is people ask a lot, I did as well, about what if we did this or what if this building did that. And the answer is usually every project is different because really every building is different. The 90 years of variety that we have in our central business district, for instance, would each building has been altered in some way. Each building represents a period of time in some way, so there's a story there. There's many that aren't contributing as well, so they have a different application. So every project is different. It's hard to kind of blanket and broad brush those applications. And then the other thing is, I want to make it clear that the city does not review or approve tax credits at all. So that's a separate process that goes through the state. We don't have any involvement with that at all. Okay, lastly, what are the next steps going on here? The consultant right now there was one meeting held with property owners, was well attended back a few weeks ago. They are currently putting together, finalizing the boundary and the map and the building evaluations to submit to the state by February. At that point, the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, would send letters to property owners to make sure that there are no objections. This is a formal process, so if there are objections, as long as there's no more than a majority objecting, then more than likely this would then be forwarded onto the National Park Service for ultimate action and consideration. If this schedule stays in play, you're looking at midsummer. By next year, you could have that action. Your role, really there is no requirement moving through this to have the city approve historic district. These are property owner driven process and initiatives. So there is no formal, it has to be approved or doesn't have to be approved. What some municipalities would do, and you can elect to do this as well, is just a resolution of support for the districts. Moving forward, there is also a few, we have 3 properties in here that would also show a level of support for. Not necessary, but certainly something, as your discussion takes place, something you would want to consider. That in a medium-sized nutshell is it. There's a lot more, but I think I can help with any questions. I know Vince Fry is still here, able to talk from the DTI's perspective.
Are there questions, comments for Mr. Fyander? Councilman Harmon.
Thank you, Your Honor. Bill, I noticed the nomination area stops, the northern boundary is 6th Street. Was any consideration given to extending the northern boundary to include the post office and then the historical buildings on the west side of Kansas Avenue, west of the LEC?
There was. In the initial survey that was done, the areas for districts have to be cohesive, and so they're not likely to get approved if you start stringing properties together. So you really jump over, for the most part, that what is that, the 500 block of Kansas. The post office itself is already moving through being listed. So it will be listed. The state has actually initiated that process for and the ultimate owner. So I know it was given consideration, but because of what has the best chance to be approved as a district, it was not included.
Okay, thanks.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Bill and Vince, You've done a great job getting this whole process this far. I have got a specific question, Bill, that I hope will be illustrative to everyone, but particularly people in this room. Let's say you happen to be a governmental entity that happened to own a really big building that took up a whole block, and you needed to do, let's say, remodel a whole suite of offices on the second floor of one of the buildings, and you needed to do major HVAC in the auditorium space in the backside of the building, and you wanted to do energy conservation, lighting, and HVAC throughout that whole system. Let's say it was going to cost you $1 million to do that, so you've been putting it off. How much in tax credits, if you're a contributing building in that historic district, could that particular governmental entity get? Assuming all $1 million were eligible.
Right. After you sell the tax credits, based on the most recent sale, you're looking at $225,000 coming back to you for $1 million investment.
And would there be any difference in how much could come back if that particular hypothetical building were on the register itself?
No, there is no percentage difference that comes back if you're individually listed versus you're part of a district. It's still 25% tax credit.
And if I understood correctly what you said earlier, that 25% basically of whatever the total cost is available year after year or project after project, not just once?
Correct. An example I used was with Topeka High. 501 had a maintenance program. They put I think $100,000 every year for 5 years. Basically, that fifth year was free. So that's kind of how they.
Well, I have a comment, and that's that I think it's a no-brainer to have City Hall and the Municipal Auditorium, our building, go on the register either as part of this district or on its own. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. And
All right, thank you. Councilwoman Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bill, we heard a while back when they had the Capitol completed that it was eligible for the international registry. Do you have any report on if that is being sought or?
Excuse me, Councilmember Schwartz. I have no, I heard that there was some work. I would have to go back and find out more where that is.
Okay. That may be something we want to follow up with the state and what they're doing.
To be supportive and work with them on that, yes. Are there other questions for Mr. Feinder? Councilman Schmidt?
Yeah, I think you may have answered this. This kind of relates back to Mr. Harmon's question and to what Ms. Hiller was saying. There's no difference between being listed as a National Register of Historic Places and being within a district, correct?
In terms of the tax credit, yes.
So the post office and I think Constitution Halls is listed across the street. Those already have these benefits.
They do, Councilmember Schmidt, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mrs. Hiller?
just to clarify, though, when you have a district, is every building eligible or only those that are considered contributing buildings?
Only the contributing buildings in the district would be able to get the tax credits.
Thank you. I just think that's important for all of us to know in terms of what we would say to others. Would our building be considered a contributing building?
Yes, this old municipal auditorium would be. And then we have two parking garages in the district. One would not be just because of age, and the other one would be
Really?
because of age. Yeah, 50 years old is the cutoff.
So being a cool 50-year-old parking garage works too?
You don't have to be cool. It just has to.
Obviously not. Okay. Well, what good news. Thank you.
Are there other questions for Mr. Feinder? Thank you. We'll proceed then. We have a public comment from Vince Fry.
Well, I think Mr. Feinder explained it well. I just wanted to let you know that DTI was very interested in this. And last October of 2013, we had a informational meeting of all the property owners downtown, and they learned that there were great benefits to be derived from this. We went to every property owner and actually got their signature on a document, which we took to SHPO, and actually received a grant that allowed us to hire Rosen Preservation to write the nomination that is currently in the process. We feel that this is a tremendous opportunity for the area, for redevelopment. Gives us a tool for incentives that we don't currently have, and some of the ones that I talked about earlier that are looking at investing downtown are basically waiting for this opportunity and very excited about the chance. So DTI is very supportive of this.
Well, and I had the opportunity to attend your hearings within the last month of the property owners. And to me, it is amazing to see the amount of support from the property owners of the area. And they were all invited, and I don't know that there was any negative. I mean, everyone is positive, looking forward to the possibility.
We have yet to see any negatives, and we had a big turnout for that, yes.
And I think we've come a long way. Where people want to do this and have the pride in
Well,
what we can
it's a
develop.
historic area. We might as well take advantage of credits that can be derived from it.
Councilman Harmon.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have a question for Mr. Feinder, if I could.
Good.
Thank you. Sorry, Vince.
Thank you, Mr. Fry.
Bill, there's a number of historic, at least I think they're historic, industrial buildings really along the riverfront. The Seymour Egg Plant right there on Kansas Avenue, right before you get across the bridge. You've got, that factory that, it's owned by the guy who owns Lindy Spring, John,
Levin.
yeah. Is there any consideration to maybe a second district bordering the riverfront on some of those more historic industrial buildings?
Councilmember Harmon, that wasn't in the original recommendations. And if I may, probably because there wasn't a cohesive, they may have not been linked together. There may be individual ones, and I think the task that the survey was looking at was identifying individual ones, but also what would make up a district. So I don't. Again, that is something we can bring up with the consultant and say, okay, have we turned that stone over and make sure that is not a possibility.
I think it's worth bringing up to the consultant, because there's some really cool buildings. Not everyone along there, but there's some cool historic industrial buildings that, particularly if we're looking down the road of riverfront development, there's going to have to be some tax incentives for someone to come in and rehab or have a development district. So that might be something you could look at. I still think this is a good, what you propose. I think it's great. I just wonder if we maybe need to expand the focus just a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Councilman Schmidt.
Yes, thank you. This is probably for Bill also. I was reminded of this when Mr. Fry came up here, who runs a very successful grant program on facade improvements downtown. That gets about a 10-to-1 return on grant monies administered. Would these tax credits for buildings in this area be available as match money for things like those grants or other historic preservation grants? Do you know how that works, or?
Councilmember Schmidt, I would believe that the appropriate tool for the tax credit in a facade project is on the back, and it is not necessarily a match because you expend the money up front and document what you've done and what you kept or what you changed, and then but you make the application for those credits prior to actually doing the work. So it's not exactly a match, but definitely it will come back to you in that regard. And you could have, that would be an eligible thing to apply for.
So it would significantly strengthen the money available to property owners through grants and through other historic preservation programs.
Exactly. I think if you're going through and doing the project and you're doing it in a way that is going to meet a certain standard, you might as well take advantage of it. It's just another tool.
Thank you very much.
Other questions, comments? Mrs. Heller?
Just across the table to Councilman Schmidt and the rest of the council, about 3 years ago, Vince, we did the Urban Core Building the Deal program. We put, Vince and I were both involved in a team that put together for the first time ever for Topeka on what is now a spiral-bound notebook of all of the different financing opportunities that are available for buildings or businesses. And it included historic tax credits, it included the facade program, included other programs. And when we actually, we had somebody come in and do an educational program about that, and there were businesses such as G-Trust that has the Carlin Building and Jeff Carson or Gizmo that have the Thatcher Building, who were kind enough to share the layering of the finances that went into those deals. And if the council were interested in having even a short presentation and having copies of that book at this juncture, I'm sure that could be arranged, because they do all layer together. And one of the things that was really a threshold moment for the chamber and for the council a few years ago was to discover that, you know, the old way had been, oh, let's not do a historic district because it might run folks off. And then people learned that when investors were coming to look at buildings, the first thing they asked was, is this a historic district? What's out there? And the times have just changed. And so those examples were really enlightening to a lot of us that had not actually put those deals together, just to know enough to be able to chat with somebody about how people put those downtown and other historic building renovations together, because often they have five to seven pieces of financing layered in to make them work.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that information. Other questions? Okay, coming to an end. Thank you very much, and this is very exciting. Look forward to hearing more as it moves along. Second item, discussion item, is the 2015 legislative agenda. Mr. Colson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask Whitney and Kathy Dameron to step forward. Over the past several months, we've brought this discussion forward to try to identify the city's legislative agenda as we go into the next legislative year. Over the past couple of years, we've tried a couple of different things, and generally speaking, I think we all agreed that we had a lot of initiatives, and it was very difficult to really make a lot of headway on all of those initiatives. So the objective this year was to bring back to this body a smaller number of initiatives that were consistent with most of the conversation that we had. What we wanted to do today was to really start with an overview of where we're at in the process, talk about some of the challenges that will be faced at the state level, and a lot of that will be budget-oriented issues. Kathy and Whitney are very skilled at providing that sort of overview, and then talk about the specific items that are being recommended as our agenda. And I know that Councilmember Hiller has also suggested some additions, and I know other people have identified. So the idea today is to have that conversation, see if we agree to what this is, and then ultimately we'll come back with an official resolution. So
Thank you.
with your permission, Mr. Mayor, we turn it over to Whitney. Are you going to go first, or Ken?
The Whitneys.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of the council, and municipal
Excuse me,
staff.
I should the Damerons. Not the Whitneys, the Damerons. My
Kathy and I
apologies.
are pleased to be here tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to represent the city in the State House, and something we have said from time to time. We have separate businesses, separate clients, and the city of Topeka is the one client we share, and because we do feel so passionately about the city's interests and live here and are proud to represent you all in the State House. I believe you've received a memorandum, one-page memorandum from us, and I was going to highlight a couple of things in that, highlight the resolution, and then Kathy is going to talk a little bit about the budget issues, and obviously we'll stand for questions as appropriate. First up, the Shawnee County delegation is coming together on Monday. They're going to have entities come in and appear before them and talk about their legislative initiatives, and there will be not-for-profits, the local chamber, Washburn, USD 501, the other school districts, and et cetera. City of Topeka is on that agenda. 10 a.m., City Manager Colson is going to be there, and I think the mayor plans to be there and others. It's in the State House in room 152 South. They're going to have a lot to say about budget issues, and will take up quite a bit of their time, I'm sure. As you may recall, earlier this interim, there was a legislative hearing on the abandoned housing issue. That issue is still out there as far as being in the legislative process. The Special Committee on Elections and Local Government will put together their final recommendations here in another couple of weeks, I believe on the 21st, to make recommendations to the 2015 legislative session. They have asked for continued input from the stakeholders in that group. We recall the City of Topeka hosted some members of that committee at some sites in Topeka. To further that, there's a conference call that I'm participating in on Thursday, hosted by the League of Kansas Municipalities. The City of Wichita is a primary player on that, as is the Unified Government of Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County. Some other municipalities have an interest, but quite frankly, the issue is we're the major entities driving that train right now. The League, certainly with the encouragement and direction of the mayor, who's the vice president of that organization this year, has been very helpful in getting some attention on that. We had circulated some questions back through city staff that we wanted to share with the League and their staff attorneys about some questions that we think need to be resolved or answered in the for the legislature. There were questions raised during the hearing process, and so we will see where that goes, see what kind of concrete proposals we can put forth to the legislature if and where necessary. As we've talked before, it's better not to go to the legislature and ask for permission for something you don't need to. So if there are things we can do either through local ordinance or through current home rule authority, it's probably best to try to pursue those things until someone says you can't. So that will be a discussion we're going to have on Thursday. We'll provide a report back to the city manager. One of the things that was in the news this week, we had elections, obviously, November 4th. Legislators in the House came to town yesterday, had elections for their leadership. Not much change in the House. We had the same Speaker of the House, Majority Leader, and Speaker Pro Tem. Senate did not elect leadership. They're in the middle of a 4-year term. Those leaders stay the same, with our Senate President from Wichita and Majority Leader from Hutchinson. Democrat leadership did change in the House. Both the Minority Leader and the Assistant Minority Leader are from Wyandotte County, so that will be some change in their structure. The issues, I was just going to highlight them that are in the draft resolution that's before you and make a couple of comments. Obviously, we talked about the issue of abandoned housing. Oppose a reduction or elimination of motor fuel tax payments to local municipalities. That will become important when Kathy talks about the budget and what that looks like. Support, review, and discussion of tax policy in Kansas. Again, what impact revenues have on the state is certainly going to be felt by local units of government. They can manifest themselves in many ways, taking away funds that have traditionally gone to municipalities or restricting your ability to levy taxes, impose, or create budgets and so forth. To the extent it is consistent with priorities when the agenda of the City of Topeka, support the League of Kansas Municipalities. Some of those kinds of major issues that the League has in front of them. City elections issues, whether they should be moved to the fall, become partisan, even-numbered years, odd-numbered years. They support status quo, which means cities have the ability to move those elections if they so choose through Home Rule Authority, protection of Home Rule Authority, protection of city, county highway funds, commercial vehicle registrations. support current law regarding use of state and local public monies to provide communications to the legislature, meaning cities, counties, other municipalities' ability to hire lobbyists, paid representation, and then some congressional issues on internet sales tax, which I think Congress in the last week has pretty much ruled that out for the rest of this term. Finally, consolidation issue. The city of Topeka has strongly supported elimination of the dual vote requirement in consolidation legislation. We'll see if something comes up on that this next legislative session. It's been relatively quiet for the last couple of years. And then city is consistent with the election issue that has been in its agenda before. A couple of things that the city of Topeka has had in its agenda that I'll just put out there that are coming back next session, obviously protection of transportation dollars. And then number two, I think we're going to see a pretty significant effort on scrap metal theft. City of Topeka has led that issue several years ago. It's come back virtually every year. Came back in 2014. It was referred to a study committee with the Kansas Judicial Council. That entity is a non-legislative body. It has lawyers, judges, municipal representatives that were brought together, utilities, scrap metal dealers, big and small, and they've come up with a comprehensive bill that will be brought back to the 2015 legislative session. The leader on that is both the Kansas Attorney General and the District Attorney of Sedgwick County. I know the District Attorney in Shawnee County is involved with that issue as well. So we're going to see something come back on that issue. So with that, I would ask Kathy to make some observations on the budget issue, and then we're certainly able to stand for questions on anything.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. About 3 weeks ago, the state's Consensus Revenue Estimating Group met post-election to give its annual November revision of estimated receipts for the state, and it was unparalleled in terms of the reduction that they have estimated both for the current fiscal year. We have an additional 7 months, and they are suggesting that we will need to find $280 million somehow over the next 7 months. That's terrifying when you think about it in terms of the reductions that have already taken place, but it kind of pales by comparison to what we're looking at for the next fiscal year, which is in excess of $700 million. So at this point, what the legislative leadership has said, and they have been meeting quietly with the governor's office and the budget division, is that really everything is on the table. And unfortunately, I think that the bad news for the city of Topeka is that everything really is on the table. And I'm very concerned that when you look at the various fee funds that affect so many of the agencies and programs and constituents that you all represent, we will have to be really all hands on deck in terms of being able to demonstrate to lawmakers what the consequences are if they sweep funds or, decide that they're going to redo the way programs are funded. There's that area of concern. Secondly, for the city of Topeka, which is somewhat unique, is the potentiality of a major reduction in force with state employees. No one has talked about layoffs or furloughs yet, but there's certainly a heightened awareness of that possibility. The conventional wisdom is that the governor will use his executive powers, perhaps as early as sometime later this week, to institute about $50 million in spending reductions. That would be sort of, across the board. No specifics really given yet, but we anticipate that they will be unveiled later this week. The budget director has said that he thinks he can find about $150 million in other efficiencies, which that still leaves another $70 million or so that they would have to find that they're thinking they would leave for the legislature to take up. So our legislature will be here starting January 12th. They will have to deal with the budget for the current fiscal year. Then they've got a 2-year budget that they have to work on starting immediately. So it will be a session where there is an incredible amount of focus on that. And I wish we had better news to tell you. It kind of reminds me of when we were here earlier this summer and feared this might be what we would be anticipating. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions? First on the budget aspect that we just heard, Councilman Schmidt?
Yes, is there any idea when we're going to hear a court ruling on the education decision from the district court?
Thank you for that question. It's anticipated that it will be sometime before the start of the legislative session. And just to refresh everyone's memory, the court has been asked to rule on the adequacy of funding.
Okay, yes. go ahead.
Just to follow that up, so that, if I remember correctly, education funding is about 65% of the state budget, which means that the $278 million that has to be cut in the next 7 months would come from the other 35% of the budget, correct?
That's roughly right. The 65% number actually includes higher education, which is not part of the lawsuit or the constitutional requirement. If you take higher education out, then K through 12 is a little over 50%. So it places an inordinate demand on those other state agencies: corrections, transportation, social services, healthcare.
But layering in social services on top of that, 51%, 12% is about another 25 to 30% on like Medicaid issues, which are things that you can't cut either. So by the time you're done, you're left with about 15% of the budget that you have to play with to come up with those numbers.
Yeah, go ahead.
And just to put this in perspective, the state budget is $6.1 million or billion dollars. So when we're talking about 700 billion
Million.
next year, we're talking about a seventh of the budget.
Other questions pertaining to the budget? Then we'll go to the resolution and the items that you provided an overview on. Between Mr. City Manager, do you want to have a process here of, or we want to go back through those or just go to questions on them?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm making an assumption that people are familiar with it, but maybe what we could do is just walk through each of the bulleted items within the resolution and have a determination as to whether, if that's one that is still, whether it's supported, and then maybe when we get through those, saying yay or nay, at the end, we could have an idea as to whether there's some additional ones that would want to be discussed.
Okay. And you all have this particular handout, then this is what we would be looking at for the, and it's the resolution then, which is like the third page in or so. The first item is the abandoned homes resolution, and I think there's a strong consensus that we continue with that. Well, maybe we say, does anyone feel differently or has an issue with this, that we maybe are giving you background? Ms. Hiller?
Well, did I hear, though, in the comments that there's going to be a consultation this Thursday morning about whether, in fact, before it gets proceeded along too far down the way, whether it's really needed or whether cities have tools already? Is that what I heard you say?
Well, I think there is an internal debate. We have seen legislation in the past. The one we've cited here for the last couple of years has been brought by Representative Stan Fraunfelter from Wyandotte County. That would allow municipalities or nonprofits essentially to attempt to take control over abandoned property. I think we look at that legislation, the intent is well-intended legislation. Concerns expressed back to us from city representatives is, if you have a process that takes an extended period of time, abandoned property, by the time you get through that determination, it's really going to start to deteriorate and have a negative impact on the neighborhood, property values, and so forth. So even if we get that bill passed, would that move the needle in Topeka? And so I think that is a question. Or is there something better? Are there other things that we can do that would be more helpful in holding delinquent taxpayers and property owners who've essentially abandoned the property accountable, or to create opportunities for them to deed their property back to the city, the county, or some other entity and just walk away from it? They might have a tax liability that needs to be cleaned up, but You have people that live out of state, they might be heirs, and they don't want it, they don't want to come and spend the money it would take to get the property up to code and so forth, and said, well, you just take it, can we walk away from our liability? And is that something that we could do under current law, or is that something that takes legislation? I mean, those are the kinds of issues that I put forth to the league that I thought we should know the answer to those. And another one is, what happens when partial payments are made on delinquent property? Does that restart the clock, and do we essentially start all over? I think having a clear answer for the legislature on some of those kinds of questions would be helpful.
And I think if I could add too, that one of the issues has been there's Wichita, Kansas City, Kansas, and Topeka each has their own unique situations. And it's hard to get a bill or something that can handle everything for everybody. So in that hearing we had, the chair asked the league to take a leadership role, perhaps put something together that all the cities could support. And I think that's partly what we're in the process of. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good, and I really appreciate that. I just wanted to bring that forth a little bit, because what that says to me is that you are working on that within the next 10 days, and that we want to make sure we revisit this one when we get ready to vote on it and see if you have a recommended update. Either take it off, affirm it, do something different. So I just wanted us to be alert. Thank you.
Second was the opposition to, and this goes into the budget issue. There's some concern that the motor fuel tax payment from the state to the municipalities would be reduced or ended, and that would have approximately a $5.5–6 million impact on our budget if that was to occur.
Okay. Mr. Schmidt?
I think we might want to consider expanding that to the sweeping of all funds. We had somebody come up here and talk about the alcohol fund being one of them that was being looked at already. And given the current budget situation at the state level, I think protection of all fee funds to local governing entities should be protected.
Okay, that's something we could consider, I think, and put.
And I would
We could do
suggest, well, I don't know that this fully addresses your point, but in bullet point number 3, where you talk about the review and discussion of tax policy, oppose changes that would negatively impact or shift state responsibilities, it partially addresses that, but I think yours is more sweeping.
Right.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah, Mrs. Hiller?
We've been talking about working with the League of Kansas Municipalities, which of course is the League of Cities. 3 of us sat on a panel today at the League of Women Voters with all 3 county commissioners, and the issue of, we were talking about legislative issues that we're facing, and the county as well relies on motor fuels tax and so on. I don't know that anything has to be written in here, but as we go through this agenda, do we go out of our way to link up with Shawnee County or the Association of Counties on those things that are of mutual interest, if I could ask?
Certainly, when I speak to that.
Yes, we periodically would meet with the Topeka Chamber, at times Shawnee County Commission or their representatives. They do not have a registered lobbyist in the State House. We work closely with Kansas Association of Counties, and I think I've mentioned before during the legislative session, League of Kansas Municipalities, Kansas Association of Counties, and other municipalities that have lobbyists in the State House, including cities, counties, school districts, and et cetera, meet once a week and compare legislative agendas. We meet early in the session and share what our respective legislative agendas are, and people historically have taken those back to their governing bodies saying, this may be something that we're interested in, or that is consistent with what our legislative agenda is. So yes, we work with all municipal lobbyists in the State House.
Thank you. I want us to mutually support the city and county here on those issues that.
And I think certainly on the tax issues.
Yeah.
These would be the ones that we would work together the most closely on. Okay, we did that. The one The city manager mentioned the next one pertaining to priorities, the agenda, imposing any restrictions on the use of state and local public monies. The next one is the requirement of the consolidation plan, where we have to have we have the dual vote of the inside the city and outside the city. And I think and actually that came up also in our discussion today with the League of Women Voters. And I think there's interest in maintaining our support for the elimination of that. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
My question is, how realistic is this with, given the current makeup? I mean, is there even any bills to do this?
The only bills we've seen in recent
We keep this in
years-
every year, and it doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, the bills we've seen in recent years certainly have a dual majority, a dual vote in city, outside city limits. We talked about the difficulty, the challenges in getting that into legislation, and at least from my understanding, it's been the city's interest that, yeah, we understand it may be difficult, if not impossible. We still think the message needs to be delivered to the legislature that, what you're putting in place is something really that won't work. And you're kind of going through the motions here if you're going to pass something that really does not create an opportunity for true consolidation.
And I don't disagree with that. I mean, I support the concept. I guess given the nature of the budget, to me, that's a higher priority than this, since it's unrealistic that this is anything's gonna change here in the near future. I just bring that up for discussion purposes when we have a long list of things that we want you to do, and clearly the financial and fiscal impact to the city and to the citizens, should we lose a lot of funding from the state, ought to be our highest priority. That's just my perspective. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And, Mrs. Ortiz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ooh, Whitney, this is for you. I want to go back to the scrap metal. I think, 4 or 5 years, I've continued to say this is an issue, this is a problem. And I know you said they're working on it, and I think 2 years ago, was it Dan Haintmonic or Brian? One of them came up here and said, you don't need to even talk about this, we're real close. That was 2 years ago. I guess I would like to see this continued to be in, because we have abandoned houses in my district that they're going in and they're taking the metal and they're stripping them. And so it goes hand in hand. I don't think one outweighs the other. As soon as they see that abandoned house, I have been so nervous in my district with signs, for sale signs going up. I've had Vivian King put out her sign. 2 days later, they stole the air conditioning unit. They just backed right in and doing it. I think they go hand in hand. So to say we're that close, 2 years ago, somebody promised me we were that close, and we still haven't got there. It's an issue. So I would like to see that implemented, unless you can tell me otherwise why, but I don't want to hear for another year we're that close. I know a lot of attorneys are working on it, and I know that people are, but we're not there yet.
Well, we'll see if the legislature has the stomach to accept the recommendations of the Kansas Attorney General and Kansas Judicial Council. I've seen the draft of what it looks like. I don't believe it's been finalized yet, but it would increase penalties up to a level 5 felony, which would start to result in some pretty serious jail time, in particular for repeat offenders. It would create a statewide database for people who go in and sell to scrap metal dealers administered by the Kansas Attorney General's office, so that people, when they come in and sell scrap metal, get cleared through a database. It would require licensing of all scrap metal locations in Kansas would have a fee. It's been suggested in the neighborhood of $1,000, an annual fee, which was reported to be acceptable to both the big and the small players in this business. And the Attorney General's office, I believe, will assign at least one investigator to conduct audits on a statewide basis and perhaps conduct sting operations and so forth. So I think the legislature's starting to really have some great concerns. Utilities have been there leading this effort for a long, long time because of what happens to their facilities, and I think the homeowners are now pushing back real hard on city council members and local elected officials as well, and small businesses certainly.
Well, and I appreciate that, but again, my opinion is to continue to leave it in there so that they understand the seriousness of it and they don't take it for granted.
I was going to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm not sure, but I think it's part of the league's policies for the session.
I don't believe it's on their action item, but.
I know it's not on the action items, but I thought in all the other areas where they support things. And so in a sense, if that's the case, when we support the league's views, then we would be saying, we support work in this area.
But it won't be without cost, because there will be potentially bed space impact. And so bed space impact with these offenders that you put them in jail. And, that's probably where it's going to be appropriate if the city wants to push this issue, communicating to the Shawnee County delegation that this is important to the residents of the city of Topeka, and there may be a cost, but we think it's important to consider that. I think they're feeling the same. They're going to have people from the utilities coming to them. They're going to have the Topeka Independent Business Association and those kinds of groups will be coming to them as well. But.
Yeah, Mrs. Ortiz?
And I hope they do, because I have businesses that they're still in the electricity, meters. Yep. And I had a business owner in his, actually it was an apartment building, and they stole his, and his building was so old, he has to revamp everything to bring it up to city compliance, and then buy new ones because they took them and they couldn't find them. It's an issue, it's a problem, and I understand it, but somewhere we've got to let these people know that they've got to quit. It's got to stop. It's got to stop somewhere. So I appreciate that. I just think, I just hear this year after year, and as long as I'm sitting in this seat, I'm going to continue to bring it to the forefront, that I think scrap metal is very, very important issue. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney.
And Mr. City Manager, I think we went down the first page. We haven't covered the one on the second page.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is a continuing discussion pertaining to the timing of city elections. And also, there's a side discussion pertaining to potential partisanship of those elections. This body has taken a position previously, and in our discussions so far have supported that city elections remain nonpartisan and separate from state and national elections, and that the city continues to determine as to when those elections would occur.
Response, comments? Mrs. Hiller?
I am fine with that one. I wanted to go back to the dual majority one
All
for
right.
just a moment.
There are no comments then on the election. We're fine leaving it where it is, I assume. Okay, let's go back to the dual majority.
Just wanted to touch on that. I know that next week, the deputy mayor and mayor are bringing forward a couple of proposals that came out of the citizen review of the form of government. And one of their recommendations was that we continue to look at and prepare for the possibility of consolidation. And I would think that out of respect, if we continue to want to see this dual majority gone, that the timing, and maybe it would help Whitney in terms of something, and Kathy in terms of something to say of putting it forth, that 10-year review of government that our committee recommended, that we continue to try and get the pieces in place so that if we chose to pursue that, we could. So, just a thought.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And going back to the comment initially, our goal was to have a smaller numbers that we could really focus on. We understand that other issues will come up during the year. We will discuss those at a body and provide direction to staff as to how to respond to those. And respecting the work that was done by Councilmember Hiller, she also provided some additional bullet points that she wanted to have included in there. Because that was new and hadn't gone through this body, we didn't make it as part of the recommendation, but a copy of her notes were provided for discussion.
Me to
Okay,
Take
did you want to briefly go over those?
There's an attachment in your packet, and those items are on the back page, just highlighted with yellow. Really appreciate the staff getting those ready. Really, the list I submitted was things I thought we'd picked up along the way. The first one was an item on our agenda last year to remove the provision that, it's a technical cleanup provision, the provision that prohibits bicyclists from riding on roads if there is a, quote, usable path. Last year, at the time of the legislative agenda, we recommended that the state take care of that, and then we ourselves took it out of our STO locally. So this would just be a small cleanup item. It shouldn't be difficult. There was an expectation that a coalition of cyclists were going to take care of this issue at the state level. So I don't know that we made it it was in our list, but it wasn't much of a priority. That coalition sort of didn't materialize as they'd hoped for the session, so. Do you want to entertain
No,
thoughts
you-
one at a
you-
time
you-
on those?
Responses? Okay, I think, why don't you just go over them?
Okay.
And we'll,
Interesting that Councilwoman Schwartz brought this up. We had the historic preservation folks here, so I just put in there to support efforts to advocate for the state capitol's nomination as a World Heritage Site. That if we put it in our legislative agenda, it would allow Whitney and others to bring it up and move it. The third was, we've had a lot of discussion that the Capitol is closed on weekends and as we, for tours, and that as we get our downtown ready and really want to increase tourism, that advocating that there be public tours on weekends of the Capitol would be in everyone's best interest, arguably. The fourth item should actually have, it has a typo in it, I think. Support legislation that would reduce the local retailer sales tax minimum increment to 0.05%. We had discussed on a number of occasions in this council that the minimum level of 0.5% to levy as a sales tax, as a local governing entity, limited some flexibility. If we wanted to do, we talked about sidewalks, for instance, and if we'd wanted to do just a small $1 million a year for 2 years or 5 years to do some sidewalks, the state law wouldn't allow us to have that small of a levy. That would be 0.05 of a cent rather than 0.5 of a cent in sales tax. Basically, the way the law is with our tax levy, we couldn't do a sales tax for less than 0.5 cent, which is then $13 million a year. We've certainly learned in our inner city trips that cities have done creative things with sales taxes, and they don't all have to be millions and millions of dollars and for 15 years. So I put that in there because we had discussed that flexibility for ourselves. And the fifth one actually came out of conversations, and I might not have gotten it right, but there was some discussion, as I recall, that people were using property taxes still as sort of a self-bank, and that perhaps if interest rates were higher on delinquent taxes, that it would do a better job of discouraging people from not paying their taxes.
Okay.
So those were the ones I added or would propose. Comments? I'm open to comments.
well, I think if you develop a resolution for the council, and then we could look at these as additions or
Okay.
move to include, or then we can vote on them individually
Okay.
at each that time. Councilman Schmidt?
I would like to entertain another addition, something that I've been approached by several people about, and I think it's probably going to be somewhat of an issue in the legislative session, and that is the expansion of Medicaid and the state's not accepting of Medicaid. The medical industry, I believe, is the second largest employer in the city of Topeka. And we have a lot of Medicaid eligible people here, and we would have more. Were Medicaid to be expanded, I think there's a very real possibility of social services, including medical services, being cut or diminished or efficiencyed in the next legislative session. And so I think that's something that we need to take a serious look at and a serious consideration of. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Comment or response, thoughts?
What would-
Okay.
What would the resolution, what should it ask for?
Well, I'm not sure how I would word the resolution, but it would essentially be directing our legislative agenda to support the expansion, the federal expansion of Medicaid, which allows for 133% of the poverty line, people earning 133% of the poverty line to be eligible for Medicaid, and it also is federally funded. I can't remember the exact year breakdown, but initially it is entirely federally funded and then breaks down to 90-some%. Yeah, it's a joint program with the state. There are, I believe, 27 states that have already accepted the expanded funding.
Well, I think the tenor of what you're saying, we can be able to put that into language for consideration, for addition. Are there other additions? I didn't ask, things that you want to include. Okay, that concludes our discussion then on the legislative agenda.
Thank you.
And we will be proceeding with that. And then the next item on the agenda is announcements, and the first is the preliminary agenda for next week, the city clerk.
The December 9th council agenda includes on the consent agenda, we have 2 board appointments for the Board of Building and Fire Appeals. We have 2 appointments to the Board of Electrical Appeals, and we have 3 tort claim appeals, one for John Bose, Angela Newsom, and John Wright. We have a public hearing and an appropriation ordinance for 2014 budget amendments. We have an ordinance and resolution for issuance of 2014 revenue bonds. We have an ordinance that will renew the American Medical Response Franchise Agreement. We have a charter ordinance concerning the duties of the mayor. If that passes, then we will have an ordinance calling an election. For that, we have a charter ordinance for the election of council members. And if that passes, we'll have another ordinance calling an election for that in April. And that is it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. City Manager, your comments, announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no announcements this evening.
Thank you. Ms. Del Isla, Mr. Manspeaker, Mrs. Schwartz.
Just briefly, last night's meeting was very well attended, and I wanted to let the city know, the city residents, that Monday night there is a meeting on Heartland Park, 5:30 to 7 at the Holiday Conference Room, 620 Southeast Madison. So, and I also thought the attendance today at the League of Women Voters, that all the county commissioners were there and 3 of us from the city, was very well attended, and I encourage a lot of citizen involvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Schmidt, Councilman Harmon, Councilwoman Hiller.
One item, quick celebration for those who saw CJ Online Saturday night or the newspaper Sunday morning. Tim Rancher did a wonderful article celebrating the success of 1107 Southwest Taylor, which was had gone through code and was up for demolition, and this council voted 10-0 to spare it from demolition based on testimony from the neighborhood that it would have been the only house on the block that had gone down, that they had rehabbed houses like that, even though it looked terrible and had a hole in the roof, and that they really believed if we would support them and vote not to demolish it, that someone would buy it and fix it up. And we had to wait a year for it to go through the tax sale, but it was bought by Don and Abby Kern, and they have fixed it up, and it is currently gorgeous. Do drive by, and it is rented out to a family of 5 and back in operation and on the tax rolls.
Thank you.
So thank everybody for their support for preservation, and it's nice to tell a success story.
Councilman Brown, Councilwoman Ortiz. Completes the announcements. Council members, we do have an executive session, and if the city attorney would state the parameters for us.
I'd request an executive session for 10 minutes to discuss potential claims against the city. I would ask to be present the elected officials, Director of Administrative Services Doug Gerber, City Attorney.
Give me option.
Okay. And Seth Lowry, the Assistant City Attorney. And Mr. Colston is feeling very ill, so he may not attend the executive session.
All right. Is there a motion for those parameters? Ms. Della Isla moves and Ms. Hiller seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes, opposed vote no.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, we'll go into an executive session when the room is clear. 10 minutes. You may or may not come back.